Between 1978 and 1980, Throbbing Gristle's Industrial News published the names of correspondents who'd sent them tapes under the heading Tapes Received. In this episode, we track down two more of them who have in common the iconic label that eventually released their music. Paul Wiggin of Section 25 and Robbie MacDonald of the crawling chaos offshoot Zyklon B Zombies both appeared in the Tapes Received list. And the label that connects both of them? Manchester's Factory Records. This is cassette culture.
Punk had kind of like ended and new wave was coming around, but at the same time there was always this like electronic side of like new wave, you know, but when we were taking that and kind of putting the twist on all of that stuff.
That's Robbie MacDonald, who we hear more from later. Quoting influences from groups like Can, Faust and Suicide, some of the musicians that took their inspiration from punk wanted to move beyond the formulas of rock and roll to explore darker, heavier terrain. Often, this meant travelling to nearby cities to seek out where the scene was happening.
Well, where we came from, Blackpool, there was kind of no scene at all, really. Yeah, there was the usual kind of hair bands and stuff like that, but there was no kind of punk scene. If you wanted anything like that in your life, you had to go to Liverpool or Manchester. And that's what we did. Larry was at art college in London and started kind of going to the clubs in London and got all kind of like excited about punk. And he came back, when he came back home, he decided to start a punk band with his brother. I was playing guitar, but in a very unconventional way. I had no musical kind of like previous. I didn't know any kind of chords or scales or anything like that. The guy who I got the guitar off tuned it to a chord. So it was like a bar chord, you know, like slide guitar. Basically, all I had to do was hit the guitar and it made a chord on its own. So that's how it kind of started.
TG's underground footprint made them an accessible point of contact for new wave musicians who were looking for something beyond the guitar bands that dominated the mainstream. With their prolific regional and international performance schedule, they were the face of what more could be possible for those who could handle it.
And in those days, Throbbing Gristle gigs were super hardcore. Like one gig I remember was in this club that had these partition doors where you could seal off the entire room. So there was a bar at the back and a stage at the front, and then there were these partition doors that would separate the bar from the gig room. You could sort of make it into two rooms. And the room was packed at the beginning of the gig. And then within no time at all, there was literally half a dozen, 10 people in the room. Everybody else had gone to the bar and they closed the partition. And it was so heavy that I was literally on my back under a table. It was like even standing up just seemed like hard work with the music. It was like very loud, very low frequency kind of vibe, very slow, very heavy. It was like drowning in treacle or something. Yeah, very intense. I mean, literally, nobody could hack it. You know, it's almost like what came later as kind of sonic warfare or something.
You could leave Cat.
Includes the 14-year-old actress playing 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute.
And then?
Very public manifest.
It was around the time where we were kind of like basically feeling fairly solid as a band and looking for kind of like opportunities to kind of like get out of the town that we were in and start playing and doing gigs and stuff. And Larry wrote to Genesis and Industrial and sent a demo. I don't even remember having sort of tape-to-tape facility at that time. It would have just been a really cheap, crappy tape recorder. And we'd have probably done 4 or 5 kind of numbers with the tape recorder on and sent the tape off. It would have been really, really crude.
Don't let me.
We got a very nice letter back from Genesis saying we weren't what they were looking for. The bass and the drums were a bit kind of like bog standard, but the guitar was interesting. Well, Larry was in absolute state of disbelief because he was a fairly good player. Things like that, I think, were very formative in shaping the direction that the band went in. Kind of like this idea of being conforming to an idea, like musically, like pop or rock or whatever, and being competent and things like that. Those are sort of things that need sort of kind of readjusting and chipping away at. I think that the letter from Genesis was like a massive influence in that. In the letter, Genesis invited us to kind of like go to Industrial and, you know, kind of meet up and hang out and stuff like that if we were in London. I can't really remember how it came about, but we did actually go down there, and that evening Cozy was doing a performance and we all went along to the performance. There was like an esoteric, slightly magical kind of dimension to it all, and to experience a sort of the band as having that kind of broader kind of context with, you know, things like performance. And yeah, they definitely had that vibe of having been around longer than everybody else, and they definitely had that old hands kind of vibe about things.
Based in Newcastle, the Crawling Chaos seized the DIY message of punk, playing gigs with punk mainstays like The Damned and starting their own label, Fetus Products. One of the people in their orbit was Robbie MacDonald, designer, photographer, organiser and soon-to-be member of the duo Zyklon B Zombies.
Anyway, so I was in Newcastle as a depressed working class area. It was about the Thatcher eras and all of that good stuff. No jobs for anyone. Everybody just thought, no future for anyone or anything like that. But for me, I was lucky because I was at college, right? And I was really into kind of like, we had started up this company called Fetus Products. And so I was hanging out with the Crawling Chaos and those guys. I was doing a lot of the advertising and record sleeves and stuff like that for Crawling Chaos, but I was kind of like in the background doing a lot of kind of like management for them, getting them gigs and stuff like that, you know. In the Chaos themselves, I mean, they were an amazing band. I mean, they were so, let's say, far ahead of their time. I mean, stuff that, you know, we were listening to, you know, prior to the band actually being formulated was, you know, like Can Out of Germany, that kind of like drumming, the bass beats and all the rest of it, you know, throwing a bit of punk in on that. And, you know, synthesizer-wise, it was actually Reese who had, you know, made his own synthesizers, you know, that were playing, and one of them was a guitar synthesizer as well, you know, and there was nothing like that around at the time. And that was also on that tape for the Zyklon B Zombies. They were, you know, kind of like anarchists at the time, and they were, you know, anti-establishment and everything. So even record labels, they wouldn't even talk to them or anything like that.
For their gig at the Rex Hotel, Whitley Bay, Robbie launched the new duo, Zyklon B Zombies, and quietly spread a rumour intended to sell as many tickets as possible.
So the rumour that we had set out there was that, you know, the headline band was going to be Crawling Chaos, but the rumour was that Throbbing Gristle were going to turn up, you know. So because like me and another buddy of mine called Curly John, who was in Fetus Products and the Chaos as well, you know, we made up this band. We just thought, hey, let's call it the Zyklon B Zombies. I mean, we were listening to Throbbing Gristle at this time, you know, we were kind of really into them. And me and Curly John had actually gone down to Derby and had seen them play at the Ajanta theatre down in Derby. So kind of that was a catalyst for really setting it off, you know. So, you know, I know at the time that Throbbing Gristle were like, you know, deep underground band and stuff. And, you know, when we put the word out, hey, yeah, Throbbing Gristle are going to be playing, and they're going to be playing under an alias name. They're going to be called Zyklon B Zombies. So that was the expectation. So, you know, a lot of people had turned up expecting to see Throbbing Gristle that night. And I had worked with the Chaoses beforehand. We'd gone into their 4-track studio and we recorded a kind of like background tape for the Zyklon B Zombies, because it was only me and John that were going to be on stage. When we were on stage, I mean, like, you know, as I said, I got covered in beer and stuff. People were throwing glasses at us and all sorts, you know. But I think that, you know, the way that you kind of get around these things is that, you know, we're kind of like inciting that audience. And, you know, visually, it was, you know, like very, very chaotic. You know, there was a lot going on. And I don't know, but I think that, you know, the majority of people just thought, hey, and just went with it, you know. I mean, that was like the type of thing that was going on in those days, you know. A lot of this stuff was experimental. It was just anybody could play music and get up there and do it, you know. So even the fact that, you know, we had ripped everyone off and all the rest of it, you know, I still think that it was a successful gig at the end of the day. You know, in the 4-track studio, we had created this kind of like sound that was like very kind of avant-garde, you know, kind of like crazy stuff, similar to, you know, what Throbbing Gristle were playing at the time. What happened was that the background tape that we had, I think that's what got sent to Throbbing Gristle, and that's what the reference is. I didn't send it off there. I think it was like Jeff and Reese out of the Crawling Chaos that sent it to them. And they sent it to them as a bit of a piss take, really. I wasn't like particularly happy with that at that particular moment in time. I just thought it was like kind of a bit detrimental, but anyway, that got sent off to them, and never heard anything back from that.
Whether or not there was a lost reply from Genesis, Zyklon B Zombies made it into the tapes received listing in the September 1979 issue of Industrial News. But what happened next is really unexpected, as both bands began to gain wider attention. Here's Paul from Section 25.
But I mean, we were using cassette a lot for ourselves. Like, pretty much every time we played, we recorded, and we quite quickly got a fairly decent machine. So we got like a Sony stereo portable recorder. Mm-hmm. And nearly everything that we did was recorded on that. And I remember a guy came round to the studio once, and they wanted a track for an EP that they were doing. And I just took the tape out of the machine and gave it to him.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it was like what came out on vinyl was literally just a 3-minute track that had been recorded on the cassette. We did a gig with Joy Division, and we were offered a record on the strength of the gig. So that was really out of the blue and unexpected, and quite early on. We didn't have to hang around very long before we got on Factory Records. There's very much to do with Ian from Joy Division, who kind of clicked and connected with us as a band. Ian and Genesis were friends as well, He would have long chats with Genesis on the phone at night and things like that. So we became friends kind of straight away, really. And that's what made it all happen. He told their manager that he wanted us to do a record, and then pretty quickly we were in the studio with Ian and Rob, their manager. And by being on Factory, whenever they were contacted for support bands for gigs and things, we were on that kind of list. So like one of the very first bands we ever supported was Talking Heads, which was like kind of, for us, really being thrown in at the deep end.
Section 25's connection with Joy Division gave Factory confidence to get behind the band. After releasing a single recorded at Cargo, the studio synonymous with the rise of the post-punk music scene in the north of England, the label next sent them to Brittania Row studio to record with Martin Hannett for their first full album, Always Now.
We found Martin very amiable, affable, easy to be with. I think because we didn't really have a very clear idea of what we wanted to sound like. It was like anybody that kind of like knew what they were doing, I think we were pretty open to just going along with that. So there was no kind of like struggle with kind of like what we want versus what he wanted or whatever. So, you know, kind of doing the kind of drugs he was doing and being very hyper-focused on what he was doing, you know, would have made him very kind of like, he would have had extreme tunnel vision, blinkered kind of focus. And so he would have been very much in his own world.
Mm.
There wouldn't be any kind of influence or control about what you were doing as creative people. He would be much more concerned with how it sounded, you know, the actual kind of quality of the sound. Because we were in Brittania Row, it was like the state-of-the-art studio. You know, it was Floyd's studio. And so there were all these toys in there, like amazing things that, you know, so like, for instance, I played, one track I did was on the studio Steinway, you know, grand piano. And I did it purely because it was there. I couldn't play the piano. I mean, one of the things with Factory was that there was no real money in it for the bands. They insisted on the studio, they insisted on the producer, and they insisted on the graphic designer. So you had to go along with that. And those three people took all the money up. Well, once the record was pressed, which took more money up, there was nothing left. So you could do a run of 10,000 albums and you'd literally get like a few £100 each because all the money would have gone on everything else. Well, when Ian died, that changed everything, really. It was like there was Factory with Ian and then there was Factory after Ian, and they were very different. When Ian died and Joy Division, you know, kind of like transitioned to New Order, it's like, I think that had a very profound effect on Larry and the direction that he wanted to go in. Where he wanted to take the music wasn't somewhere I felt I could go.
In the aftermath of their gig at the Rex Hotel, Crawling Chaos discovered that they too were being watched. Here's how Robbie remembers it.
And what we didn't realise at the time was that there was two scouts in the audience from Factory Records. So after we came off stage, you know, these scouts came up to us and they're going, wow, that's like, you know, freaking amazing stuff. It wasn't because it was like musically great or anything like that. I think it was more to do with the fact that it was so avant-garde at the time. So from there, I'd mentioned, well, you know, we're already part of Fetus Products, and the main band is Crawling Chaos, and, you know, then after that, Chaos came in, they watched them and all the rest of it. We, you know, did the invites and stuff like that for the Factory people to meet the Chaoses afterwards, and, you know, as a result for that, the Chaoses got signed up in Factory Records, and it was probably around about 3 months after that they released Fact 17 on Factory Records, and that was like Sex Machine from the Crawling Chaos.
I've got a brand new pair of jeans. I've been to the job, he's got the means. Turn me to a sex machine. He's given me a pair of enormous balls. I could build the mental wall. Through those screaming for more and more.
after the single got released, there was going to be an album. Now, we went over to Tony Wilson's house, actually, and this was probably in early 1980, and we were meant to drop off all of the 4-track studio work that we had done for the album, which was going to be called The Gas Chair Clown. And at that time, when we went over to see Tony Wilson, he was in hiding because he had just done a series on Granada Television about the miners' strike, and the government weren't too pleased about that and were like absolutely after him. So you had like MI5 involved and all of this stuff. And anyways, we go over and he let us kind of like know where he was. So we went round to his house about 5 a.m. in the morning and met Tony Wilson. The first thing he said to us, "Hey, do you want a joint, guys?" And we were, yeah. So I was smoking pot 5 a.m. in the morning at Tony Wilson's. He's like looking out the frigging window in case the police would turn up and stuff like that. The Chaos at the time, right, they had sent over some of the tracks to them that they were meant to lay down for this album, but in the end, the Chaos, being like anarchists and all the rest of it, basically said fuck that, and they just put down their own tracks on that album, you know. So that's how I think that they ended up putting them on Crepuscule. So that was the Factory Crepuscule label. And they produced the album. And then after that, like, gosh, we did a couple of gigs with Factory Records. I mean, I remember doing one in Manchester with Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. Let's see, we also backed a Certain Ratio, and then we ended up at the Leaf Festival. But what we were known for at the time was just being like, you know, total nutcases, and, you know, everybody was kind of like staring clear of us. So even at the Leaf Festival, when the Chaos went on stage, they wouldn't leave. They had to put the bouncers on in the end and like drag people off the stage. You know, like Jeff and Reese were both lying on the ground with their guitars playing, getting dragged by their legs off the stage. You know, and then the other thing is that in the back room, that, like, you know, because this was like, you know, Joy Division, we backed them as well. So anyway, Joy Division were in the background, and, you know, we were like stealing all their beer and getting drunk and all of this lot and threatening to beat up Joy Division and stuff and calling them names and all the rest of it. So anyways, everyone from Factory Records hated the Crawling Chaos, and they were quite happy at the time. They just like let it go, you know, because really they wanted to, you know, put their own music out on Fetus Products, which was our own label. The Chaos just didn't want to be anything like mainstream. I was so pissed off with them because they had an opportunity with Factory Records and they really could have done something.
In this episode of the Cassette Culture Podcast, you heard the voices of me, Martin Franklin, with Paul Wiggin from Section 25 and Robbie MacDonald of Zyklon B Zombies. The music you heard was Fallen by Section 25 from the Illuminus Illumine cassette. Life from Side A of the Zyklon B Zombies backing tape. Throbbing Gristle live at the Ajanta Cinema, Derby, 1979. You by Section 25 from Jams from the Bardo. Red Voice from the Blackpool Rocks EP. Rose Apple Island by Section 25 from Jams from the Bardo. New Horizons from the Illuminus Illumine cassette. Death, Side B of the Zyklon B Zombies backing tape. And Sex Machine by Crawling Chaos.